In the summer of 2024, Egypt's electricity grid collapsed under extreme heat. 110 million people scheduled their lives around rolling blackouts. Businesses spent billions on diesel generators. Hospitals rationed air conditioning. Egypt's solution sounds like science fiction. Flood 7,570 square miles of desert, an area the size of Lake Ontario, and use the Mediterranean rushing into the Sahara Depression to generate 6,800 megawatts of clean electricity. The depression sits 436 feet below sea level, which means water would fall through turbines with massive force. Then, the desert heat takes over, evaporating water continuously, pulling more seawater through the system in a perpetual cycle. It's a natural battery that never stops running. The question is whether Egypt can actually build it, and whether flooding the desert solves their crisis or creates new problems. Egypt wants to create a sea in the desert and power the country with it. The depression stretches roughly 120 miles east to west and 90 miles north to south, roughly comparable to Lake Ontario or twice the size of Lebanon. At its deepest point, it reaches depths equivalent to a 40-story building below sea level, creating the elevation differential that makes power generation possible. The depression has a teardrop shape, with steep escarpments rising to 920 feet on the northern edge and gentle slopes leading down to the Great Sand Sea in the south. Right now, it's mostly salt marshes, dry lake beds, and powdery sand that can swallow military vehicles whole. During World War II, British forces used the depression as a natural barrier at El Alamein, knowing German tanks couldn't cross it. The area remains dangerous today because millions of unexploded mines from those battles still lie buried in the sand. The basic concept is deceptively simple. Dig a canal or bore a tunnel from the Mediterranean Sea, roughly 34 to 50 miles depending on the route, down to the depression. Water rushes in, drops through turbines, and generates electricity. The desert heat does the rest. In the scorching climate, water would evaporate at a rate of 0.18 inches per day. As water disappears into the air, more flows in from the sea. It becomes a perpetual cycle where the sun itself drives the system. Engineers call it gravity-fed hydroelectricity with natural evaporative balance. Eventually, the depression would hold a massive hypersaline lake maintained at about 197 feet below sea level, where inflow perfectly matches evaporation. This isn't a new idea. Back in the late 1800s, French geographer François-Élie Roudère was obsessed with creating what he called a Sahara Sea. His proposal even inspired Jules Verne's final novel, Invasion of the Sea. The Sahara Depression specifically entered the conversation in 1912 when German geographer Albrecht Penck proposed using it for energy generation. But the real groundwork came in 1927 when British geologist John Ball, director of Egypt Survey, mapped the area and calculated it could produce 125 to 200 megawatts of hydroelectric output. Then, in 1957, the CIA got involved. Declassified documents show the agency proposed the project to President Dwight Eisenhower as a way to achieve Middle East peace. Their pitch claimed 4 benefits. It would be peaceful and transformative, alter the regional climate, provide construction jobs and new living areas, and crucially, get Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's mind off Soviet partnerships. Eisenhower rejected it. The biggest challenge has always been construction. How do you move enough earth to create a canal 197 feet deep through mountainous terrain? In the 1970s, German hydraulic engineer Friedrich Bassier proposed a solution that sounds like science fiction: use nuclear bombs. Bassier's plan called for drilling 213 boreholes along the canal route. Into each hole, crews would place a nuclear device yielding 1.5 megatons. For context, that's 100 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Detonate them all simultaneously, and the resulting canal would be instant. The plan fit within President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, which promoted peaceful uses of nuclear technology. Bassier calculated this method would be far cheaper than conventional excavation. He even prepared evacuation plans for 25,000 people who lived in the blast zone. The proposal quickly died. Beyond the obvious radiation concerns, The blasts would have created radioactive fallout affecting Egypt, Libya, Israel, and potentially southern Europe. There was also the Red Sea Rift, a tectonically unstable zone just 280 miles away, where the shockwaves could have triggered earthquakes. Egypt declined. Fast forward to today, and Egypt is projected to face an energy crisis that makes the Qatar project look less crazy. The country's electricity system runs on natural gas. In 2024, 89% of Egypt's power is expected to come from fossil fuels, with natural gas supplying about 81%. This worked well when Egypt's massive Zohr gas field was producing over 2.7 billion cubic feet per day. But by 2024, production had crashed to around 1.9 to 2 billion cubic feet daily. Egypt transformed from a net exporter to a net importer of gas, spending billions on liquefied natural gas shipments just to keep the lights on. The summer of 2024 was particularly bad. Extreme summer temperatures increased cooling demand by 35%, overwhelming the grid during peak afternoon and evening hours. Rolling blackouts extended from 1 hour to 3 hours daily. Hospitals ran on diesel generators, costing facilities $12,000 per month extra. Ships lost $2 billion in spoiled inventory. Air conditioning became a luxury even middle-class families couldn't afford. The government issued apologies, a rare admission of failure for President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's administration. In 2023, Egypt announced a new feasibility study for the Qatar project, working with consultants to evaluate modern construction methods. No nuclear bombs this time. Instead, the plan would use conventional tunnel boring machines, similar to those Egypt already employed building the Cairo metro and tunnels under the Suez Canal. The capacity estimates are substantial. Initial proposals suggested a first phase generating 670 megawatts, a second phase adding 1,200 megawatts, with the total system reaching approximately 5,800 megawatts when fully operational. More recent studies from 2025 suggest even higher numbers, with some projections reaching up to 6,800 megawatts when fully built out. That would rival Aswan's 2,100 megawatt capacity, but unlike Aswan, which depends on Nile flows Egypt no longer fully controls, Qatar's source is the Mediterranean. To put that in context, Egypt hit a record peak demand of 39.5 gigawatts in July 2025. The Qatar project could potentially supply approximately 15% of that peak demand when fully operational. Beyond generating power as water flows in, the system doubles as a massive battery. During the day, when Egypt's solar farms produce excess electricity, pumps move water from the Qatar lake to reservoirs built at higher elevation. At night, when solar stops working and demand stays high, that water flows back down through turbines, supplying the grid exactly when it's needed most. The storage capacity could hold 20 gigawatt hours, enough to power Cairo for 4 hours after sunset. As Egypt pushes toward 42% renewable energy by 2030, storage becomes the critical bottleneck. Solar panels generate electricity during midday when demand is moderate, but Egyptian cities need maximum power from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., precisely when air conditioning demand peaks during brutal summer afternoons. Wind farms along the Mediterranean produce inconsistently, sometimes generating 20% of rated capacity, other times hitting 90%. A water battery that can absorb excess generation during sunny, windy hours and release it precisely when the grid needs it most keeps the entire system stable. Without storage, Egypt's renewable build-out hits a ceiling. You can't run a grid on sources that disappear when the sun sets or the wind dies. Powered by the same system, desalination plants could produce hundreds of billions of gallons of fresh water annually. While that's far less than the Nile's 14.6 trillion gallons per year, it could irrigate new farmland and supply arid regions with drinking water, reducing Egypt's dependence on a river that Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam is already disrupting. That 0.18 inches of daily evaporation carries another benefit. As seawater evaporates, it leaves behind salt and minerals, including lithium. In 2024, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates began exploring lithium extraction from salt pans. If the Qattara Lake materializes, it could become one of the world's largest lithium mining operations, producing the raw material for electric vehicle batteries. Creating a hypersaline lake this size carries serious risks. The biggest concern is groundwater contamination. The depression sits above the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer, an ancient underground reservoir that supplies fresh water to oases across the Western Desert. If salt water seeps into that aquifer, it would contaminate water sources that people and wildlife depend on. The depression also hosts ecosystems adapted to current conditions. Cheetahs hunt gazelles in the area. Wild oases support palm groves and wetlands. Creating a massive salt lake would destroy these habitats. Once filled, reversing the system would require intervention on a scale that might prove impossible. In December 2025, climate scientist Amir Aghakuchak from the University of California, Irvine, is expected to publish research examining the Qattara Depression as part of a broader strategy to combat sea level rise. His team calculated that flooding the depression could lower global sea levels by a few millimeters initially, and that ongoing evaporation would continue removing water from the oceans over time. Aghakuchak is careful to stress this isn't a climate solution, it's a marginal contribution. But in a world where seas are projected to rise at least 12 inches by the end of the century, even small interventions matter. The depression's large area, extreme aridity, and proximity to the Mediterranean make it one of the few places on Earth where this approach could work. Nobody knows exactly what the project would cost today. Earlier estimates suggested around $9 billion, but that was before accounting for modern environmental studies, mitigation systems to protect groundwater, and the realities of constructing in a minefield. Some projections now push costs higher, potentially exceeding $10 billion. The timeline is equally uncertain. Construction could take a decade or more before the first drop enters the system, and once that water begins flowing, filling the depression would take roughly 10 more years. We're talking about a project that would span at least 20 years from groundbreaking to full operation. For over a century, people have dreamed about flooding the Qattara Depression. From French geographers in the 1800s to German engineers proposing nuclear bombs in the 1970s, the idea has never completely died. Now, with Egypt facing an energy crisis, water scarcity from the Grand Renaissance Dam, and a growing population exceeding 110 million, the project is getting another look. The stakes are different now. This isn't about geopolitical maneuvering or peaceful nuclear experiments. It's about keeping the lights on during summer heatwaves. It's about finding alternatives to expensive gas imports that drain foreign currency reserves. Whether Egypt builds Qattara depends on whether 15% of peak capacity justifies flooding 7,570 square miles, and whether the benefits of constant Mediterranean-fed power outweigh the risks of creating a lake that, once filled, cannot easily be undone. For now, the Qattara Depression remains what it has been for millennia, a vast empty space below the waves that once covered it, waiting for someone bold enough to bring the ocean back. Here's a question for you. If you were Egypt's president, would you flood the Qattara Depression? Or would you invest those billions in solar farms, nuclear plants, or something else? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe for more MegaBuilds stories.